My phone buzzed at 11:43 a.m. with a calendar reminder I'd been dreading for 6 months. Sarah's wedding. RSVP required. My ex-wife was marrying Trevor Blackstone, the youngest VP in her company's history. But what happened at that wedding, and what I did 3 days later with a single phone call, would destroy Trevor's career, expose Sarah's true character, and prove that sometimes the person who underestimated you is standing on a foundation you built. Before I tell you what I closed that $70 million account for, comment below. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who had no idea who they were dealing with? Because what started as a wedding invitation ended with me dismantling an empire brick by brick. Saturday morning, April 6th. I sat in my home office in Westchester County, New York, staring at the wedding invitation on my desk. Cream-colored cardstock, elegant calligraphy, Sarah's name followed by Trevor Blackstone's. Mr. Marcus Chen requests the honor of your presence. Except Sarah hadn't requested anything. Her mother had added my name to the guest list without telling her. I'd gotten the courtesy call from Sarah's sister 2 weeks ago. Marcus, Mom invited you before checking with Sarah. You don't have to come. She'll understand. But I was going. Not because I still loved Sarah, that had died during our divorce 18 months ago. I was going because Trevor Blackstone had been sending me messages. Not direct messages. Trevor was too smart for that. But for the past year, since he and Sarah started dating, I'd been hearing things. Comments that filtered back through mutual friends, through business contacts, through the invisible network that connects New York's financial world. Sarah really upgraded. Must be nice to be with someone on her level now. Trevor Blackstone makes real money. Not that startup gambling Marcus was doing. And my personal favorite, delivered by a former colleague at a charity gala, Trevor said Sarah wasted her 20s with a guy who played with other people's money instead of making his own. I'm a wealth manager. I've been one for 15 years. At 42 years old, I manage portfolios for 17 ultra-high net worth clients with a combined asset value of $470 million. My personal compensation last year was $3.2 million. But Trevor was right about one thing. Technically, I do play with other people's money. The difference is, I'm exceptionally good at it. Sarah and I met at Columbia Business School in 2008. She was brilliant, top of our class, destined for corporate leadership. I was a quiet one in the back who somehow aced every exam without appearing to study. We bonded over late-night study sessions and a shared love of dim sum in Chinatown. We got married in 2012, young and ambitious and convinced we'd conquer the world together. For a while, we did. She climbed the corporate ladder at Meridian Financial Group, going from analyst to director to senior director. I built my wealth management practice from scratch, slowly accumulating clients who trusted me with generational wealth. The marriage lasted 11 years. The love lasted maybe 7. We've grown apart, Sarah said during the conversation that ended our marriage. We were sitting in our living room, her living room now, on a Tuesday evening in October. I need someone who understands my world. The corporate strategy, the executive pressure, the ambition. I understand ambition, I'd said quietly. You understand making rich people richer, Marcus. That's not the same as building something. The words stung because she believed them. Sarah had convinced herself that wealth management was somehow less legitimate than climbing a corporate hierarchy. That managing $400 million responsibly was less impressive than having a VP title. We divorced amicably. No kids, clean asset split, both of us financially independent. She kept the Westchester house. I'd never liked it anyway. I bought a penthouse in Tribeca with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson. The divorce was finalized in March 2023. By June, she was dating Trevor Blackstone. Trevor was 38, charismatic, aggressive. He joined Meridian Financial Group 5 years ago and rocketed through the ranks through a combination of genuine talent and strategic relationship building. He closed major deals, brought in important clients, and knew exactly how to navigate corporate politics. And he hated me, though we'd never met. I knew this because Trevor had to tell. He talked. At industry events, at client dinners, at charity galas. Trevor loved being the center of attention, loved telling stories that positioned him as the hero. And increasingly, Those stories included subtle digs at Sarah's ex-husband. Sarah's so much happier now that she's with someone who gets it, he told a table of executives at a fundraiser. My friend David had been there, had texted me the quote immediately. Gets what? I texted back. Real success. Real ambition. He literally said, not some backroom number cruncher playing it safe with inherited wealth. Inherited wealth. My clients had worked for their money, built companies, created value, employed thousands. I helped them preserve that wealth, grow it strategically, pass it to the next generation intact. There was nothing safe about being trusted with someone's entire financial legacy. But Trevor didn't see it that way. To him, I was a glorified accountant. Safe. Boring. Beneath Sarah's level. The irony was delicious, because Trevor didn't know the full story. Nobody did. My largest client was a woman named Evelyn Park, 73 years old, widow of a tech entrepreneur who'd sold his company for $200 million in 2015. Evelyn's account represented $70 million of my managed assets, 15% of my entire practice. But here's what Trevor didn't know, what nobody in Sarah's world knew. Evelyn Park was also the majority shareholder of Meridian Financial Group. She bought her controlling stake in 2018, quietly, through a series of shell companies and trust structures I'd helped her set up. On paper, Meridian Financial Group was publicly traded. In reality, Evelyn and two other family trusts controlled 51% of voting shares. She didn't advertise this. Old money rarely does. She attended exactly one board meeting per year, voted by proxy on everything else, and let the company's executive team run operations. As far as most people knew, Meridian was just another mid-sized financial services firm with diverse ownership. Trevor Blackstone had no idea that his girlfriend's ex-husband managed the account of the woman who could fire him with a phone call. And Sarah? Sarah had known, once. But we hadn't discussed my clients during the divorce proceedings. Confidentiality agreements prevented it. I don't think she remembered. Or maybe she'd never really paid attention to what I did. Either way, I was going to that wedding. I wanted to meet Trevor Blackstone face to face. I wanted to see what kind of man had convinced himself he was better than me while being completely oblivious to the power dynamics actually at play. Call it curiosity. Call it pride. Call it the petty satisfaction of knowing something everyone else didn't. I just didn't know yet that Trevor would make it so easy to destroy him. The wedding was at the Plaza Hotel, because of course it was. Sarah had always loved grand gestures, and Trevor clearly had the budget for them. I arrived at 4 p.m., wearing a charcoal Tom Ford suit. Understated, expensive, perfectly tailored. The ceremony was in the grand ballroom, 300 guests seated in neat rows. I took a seat in the back, watching Sarah's family and Trevor's corporate crowd fill the space. I recognized several Meridian executives, including the CEO, Richard Chen, no relation despite the shared last name. Sarah looked beautiful walking down the aisle. I felt nothing romantic. That ship had sailed, but I could appreciate that she was happy. Genuinely happy, in a way she hadn't been with me toward the end. Trevor stood at the altar looking like a J. Crew ad come to life. Tall, athletic build, expensive haircut, that confident smile of someone who'd never seriously failed at anything. The ceremony was tasteful and brief. They exchanged vows, kissed, and the crowd applauded. I clapped politely, already calculating how long I needed to stay at the reception before leaving. The cocktail hour was where everything changed. I was standing near the bar, nursing a scotch, when I heard Trevor's voice behind me. Sarah, that's him. That's Marcus. I turned slowly. Sarah and Trevor stood 10 feet away, Sarah looking mortified, Trevor looking amused. Trevor, don't, Sarah said quietly. But Trevor was already walking toward me, hand extended, that megawatt smile locked in place. Marcus Chen, finally meet the legend. Sarah's told me so much about you. His handshake was aggressive, designed to establish dominance. I shook firmly but briefly. Congratulations on the wedding. Thanks, man. Appreciate you coming. Takes a big person to attend their ex's wedding. He said it like he was complimenting a child for good behavior. Sarah appeared at his elbow. Marcus, you didn't have to come. I know, Mom. It's fine, Sarah. I wanted to wish you well. An awkward silence settled. Trevor filled it, because Trevor always filled silences. So you in wealth management, right? Sarah mentioned you handle some accounts. Some. I agreed neutrally. That's great, man. Really important work, keeping rich people's money safe. Someone's got to do it. He laughed, and several people nearby laughed with him. Me? I'm more on the aggressive growth side. Making new money, not just protecting old money, you know? Different skill sets, I said evenly. Exactly. That's what I tell Sarah. Her ex was the careful type, I'm the ambitious type. Nothing wrong with either, just different philosophies. He put his arm around Sarah's waist possessively. Though I got to say, the upside on making real deals is a lot better than 2% management fees. Someone nearby, I think it was Trevor's brother, laughed. Trevor, come on. What? I'm just saying. Marcus knows what he is. Safe, steady, reliable. That's his brand. Me? I take risks. Close major accounts. That's how you get ahead, right, Marcus? I could have walked away. Should have walked away. But something in his tone, the casual dismissiveness, the assumption that he'd won some competition I hadn't known we were having, made me stay. What's the biggest account you've closed? I asked conversationally. Trevor grinned. Funny you should ask. Last month I brought in a $12 million corporate relationship. 3-year exclusive contract for Meridian's wealth advisory services. It was a hell of a pitch. Congratulations. That's significant. Yeah, it was pretty major. Richard, that's our CEO, said it was the biggest new account this quarter. I'll probably make VP of Business Development by year-end. He said it with the confidence of someone who'd already been promised the promotion. And before that, I asked, what was your previous largest deal? Probably the healthcare group I brought in 18 months ago. $8 million relationship. He was showing off now, chest puffed out, playing to the small crowd that had gathered. I nodded thoughtfully. So in 5 years at Meridian, your largest single client relationship is $12 million. Yeah, you manage anything that size. The challenge was explicit now. I took a sip of scotch, considering my response. Sarah was staring at me with warning in her eyes, silently pleading for me to let it go. I let it go. Congratulations again on the wedding, I said. Sarah, you look beautiful. I hope you'll both be very happy. I walked away, found David in the crowd, and told him I was leaving early. Trevor's an asshole, David said. You should have destroyed him. It's their wedding, not the time or place. You're better than me. I'd have made him cry. I drove home to Tribeca, changed into comfortable clothes, and sat on my balcony watching the sunset over the Hudson. My phone buzzed with a text from Evelyn Park's assistant. Mrs. Park requests a portfolio review meeting this week. She mentioned wanting to discuss the Meridian holdings specifically. Are you available Thursday at 2 p.m.? Interesting timing. I confirmed the meeting and poured myself another scotch. Thursday was 5 days away. The newlyweds would still be on their honeymoon. Sarah had mentioned they were going to the Maldives for 10 days. Trevor Blackstone had spent the evening of his wedding making sure everyone knew he was more successful, more aggressive, more valuable than his wife's boring ex-husband. He had no idea that his entire career existed at the pleasure of a 73-year-old woman whose portfolio I managed. And he'd just given me a reason to have a very specific conversation with that woman. Thursday afternoon, I arrived at Evelyn Park's townhouse on the Upper East Side at 1:55 p.m. Her assistant, Margaret, greeted me at the door and led me to Evelyn's study, a book-lined room with large windows overlooking a private garden. Evelyn sat behind an antique desk, reading glasses perched on her nose, a cup of tea steaming beside her. At 73, she was sharp as ever, her mind for numbers and strategy undiminished by age. Marcus, punctual as always. Sit, please. I settled into the leather chair across from her desk. We'd been working together for 9 years, since shortly after her husband passed. In that time, I'd grown her $50 million inheritance to $70 million through careful allocation, strategic rebalancing, and an instinct for when to be aggressive and when to be conservative. Your email mentioned reviewing the Meridian holdings. I began. Yes. I've been thinking about my position there. She removed her glasses and looked at me directly. Richard Chen called me last week. Did you know? I didn't. He wanted to give me an update on the company's performance. Very professional, very thorough. But Marcus, he also mentioned something interesting. She paused, sipping her tea. He mentioned that Trevor Blackstone, one of their vice presidents, recently married Sarah Chen. Your ex-wife. I kept my expression neutral. That's correct. Richard seemed concerned about potential conflicts of interest. Not legally. You don't manage any Meridian accounts directly. But he wondered if I knew about the connection, given that I'm both a major client of yours and a major shareholder of Meridian. I disclosed the marriage in my annual relationship updates. I said, it's in the documentation we filed in January. Sarah and I divorced 18 months ago. Trevor works at Meridian, but has no relationship with my practice. I'm not questioning your ethics, Marcus. In 9 years, you've been impeccable. She set down her teacup. I'm questioning whether I want to continue holding a controlling stake in a company where the culture seems to value flash over substance. This was unexpected. Has something specific happened? Richard sent me Trevor Blackstone's promotion packet. He's being considered for VP of Business Development. Richard wanted board approval since it's a significant promotion. She slid a folder across the desk. I reviewed his record. Impressive on the surface, several major account acquisitions, strong revenue generation. But Marcus, when I dug deeper, I found something troubling. I opened the folder. Inside were financial records, client acquisition reports, and performance reviews for Trevor Blackstone. Page 7, Evelyn said. I flipped to it. A detailed breakdown of Trevor's $12 million major account, the one he'd bragged about at the wedding. The client was Hendrix Healthcare Group. The contract was indeed for $12 million in wealth advisory services over 3 years. But there was a footnote I hadn't expected. The contract included a guarantee of minimum 8% annual returns. I looked up. He guaranteed returns. Apparently, that's how he closed the deal. Hendrix was choosing between Meridian and 2 other firms. Trevor promised them 8% annually or Meridian would refund their advisory fees. This was staggeringly stupid. No legitimate wealth manager guarantees specific returns. It's nearly impossible in the current market environment and exposes the firm to enormous liability. Is Richard aware of this guarantee? He signed off on it. Trevor apparently convinced him it was necessary to close the deal, and that the firm's investment team could easily hit 8% with Hendrix's risk profile. Evelyn's expression was grim. But the market hasn't cooperated. Hendrix is currently tracking at 4.2% return year-to-date. If that continues, Meridian will owe them approximately $450,000 in fee refunds and potentially more in breach of contract penalties. How did you learn this? These details wouldn't be in a standard promotion packet. I'm the majority shareholder, Marcus. When I ask for details, I get them. She leaned back in her chair. But here's what concerns me more. I had my attorneys review Trevor's other major accounts. 3 of them, including the healthcare group from 18 months ago, have similar problematic structures. Guaranteed returns, aggressive growth promises that haven't materialized, contracts that expose Meridian to significant liability. How significant? If all 3 accounts demand full performance guarantees and fee refunds based on current performance, we're looking at $1.8 million in liabilities. That's manageable for a firm of Meridian's size, but it's a troubling pattern. Trevor Blackstone closes accounts by making promises the firm can't keep. I sat back, processing this. Trevor had spent an entire evening bragging about deals that were actually ticking time bombs. What do you want to do? I asked. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. I'm considering selling my Meridian stake. Not because of Trevor specifically, though he's symptomatic of a larger problem. The firm's culture has shifted. Richard is letting his VPs make reckless promises to hit growth targets. That's not sustainable. Selling 51% of a publicly traded financial services firm will take time. It'll also likely tank the stock price when word gets out that the majority shareholder is exiting. I'm aware, which is why I wanted your advice. She looked at me seriously. Is this personal, Marcus? Your ex-wife just married a man who's apparently been quite disrespectful toward you. If I sell my stake and tank Meridian's value, it impacts Trevor's career directly. I need to know if I'm making a sound financial decision or if I'm being influenced by interpersonal drama. This was why I respected Evelyn. Direct, thoughtful, unwilling to let emotions drive financial decisions. Honestly, it's both, I said. Trevor is an arrogant fool who underestimated me. That's personal. But Evelyn, even without the personal element, the financial picture concerns me. A VP making guaranteed return promises in this market environment shows poor judgment at best, fraud at worst. If Richard is enabling that behavior, the firm has a leadership problem. So you'd recommend I sell regardless of the personal dynamics? I'd recommend we explore options. Selling is one. Another is you asserting more direct oversight as majority shareholder, attending board meetings, demanding policy changes around client acquisition practices. A third option is using your leverage to force leadership changes. Evelyn smiled slightly. The third option interests me. Explain. You control 51% of voting shares. That means you can replace the board, force executive changes, or demand operational reforms. If Trevor's pattern of guaranteed returns represents broader cultural problems, you could require Richard to implement new policies, prohibit guaranteed returns, require board approval for any client contract over $5 million, mandate performance reviews of all VPs. And if Richard refuses, then you replace Richard. She laughed, a genuine sound of surprise. Marcus, you've never been this aggressive in 9 years of working together. You've never asked me about Meridian specifically before. Usually we focus on your broader portfolio strategy. True. She tapped her fingers on the desk thoughtfully. Here's what I'm thinking. I don't want to sell immediately. You're right that it will be disruptive and costly. But I do want accountability. Trevor Blackstone has created significant liability for a firm I'm heavily invested in. That's unacceptable regardless of his relationship to your ex-wife. What do you want me to do? Schedule a board meeting for next week. I'll attend personally. I want a full review of all client contracts signed in the past 18 months, with specific focus on performance guarantees and liability exposure. I want Trevor present to explain his deals. And I want recommendations from Richard on how to prevent this pattern going forward. That's going to make waves, Evelyn. You've been a silent shareholder for 6 years. Suddenly calling emergency board meetings will signal something's wrong. Something is wrong. I own 51% of a company whose VPs are writing checks the firm can't cash. I should have been paying closer attention. She looked at me firmly. Make it happen, Marcus. And Marcus, if this impacts Trevor Blackstone's career negatively, that's a consequence of his own choices, not yours or mine. I left Evelyn's townhouse at 4:30 p.m. with instructions to coordinate with Meridian's board secretary. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday, 9 days after Trevor's wedding. As I walked to the subway, my phone buzzed with an Instagram notification. Sarah had posted photos from the Maldives, turquoise water, white sand beaches, her and Trevor looking impossibly happy. The caption read, "Starting our forever with my perfect partner. So grateful for this upgrade in every way." Upgrade. I screenshot the post and sent it to David with a simple message. Upgrades are about to be re-evaluated. Wednesday morning, I met Evelyn at Meridian Financial Group's headquarters in Midtown. The building was a glass tower, 40 stories of steel and ambition. Meridian occupied floors 22 through 25. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the executive conference room. I wasn't attending. I wasn't on the board and had no official role. But Evelyn had requested I be available by phone in case there were questions about her portfolio or investment strategy. I waited in a coffee shop across the street, laptop open, watching email. At 10:47 a.m., my phone rang. Evelyn's assistant, Margaret. "Mrs. Park would like you to come to the conference room. 22nd floor, reception will direct you." Interesting. I arrived 12 minutes later. The receptionist looked nervous, speaking into her headset in hushed tones before gesturing me toward the conference room. Inside, I found organized chaos. Evelyn sat at the head of a long table, flanked by 8 board members, a mix of external directors and Meridian executives. Richard Chen sat to her right, looking pale. And at the far end of the table, visibly uncomfortable, sat Trevor Blackstone. He saw me enter and his eyes widened in confusion. "Marcus, thank you for coming," Evelyn said calmly. "We're discussing risk management policies, and I wanted your perspective as someone who's observed these issues from a client management standpoint." I took a seat near the door, far from the main table. Trevor was staring at me like I'd materialized from another dimension. Richard Chen cleared his throat. "As I was saying, we've reviewed the contracts Mrs. Park requested. There are 7 client agreements from the past 2 years that include performance guarantees or similar commitment clauses. Combined liability exposure if all clients exercise their guarantee provisions is approximately $2.3 million. One of the board members, an older woman I didn't recognize, spoke up. "That seems manageable for a firm of our size. Is this unusual?" "It's not standard practice," Richard admitted. "Most wealth management firms avoid guaranteed returns because market performance is unpredictable. These contracts were approved as exceptions to close high-value relationships." "Exceptions approved by whom?" Evelyn asked. "By me, in consultation with the VPs who brought in each account. VPs like Trevor Blackstone." All eyes turned to Trevor. He sat up straighter, clearly trying to project confidence. "Mrs. Park, I understand this looks concerning in isolation, but context matters. The Hendricks Healthcare account was a competitive bid situation. We were up against 2 larger firms. The guaranteed return was a deciding factor in choosing Meridian. And when Hendricks demands a refund because you're tracking 4 percentage points below the guarantee," Evelyn asked, "we're working on rebalancing their portfolio. There's still time to hit the annual target." "What if you don't?" Trevor hesitated. "Then we honor the contract terms. But that's worst-case scenario. My track record shows I close accounts that generate significant revenue. The occasional fee refund is the cost of aggressive growth." "Aggressive growth," Evelyn repeated. "Mr. Blackstone, you generated $12 million in committed advisory fees with a Hendricks contract. If you owe them $450,000 in refunds at year-end, your actual net revenue is $11.55 million over 3 years. That's $3.85 million annually. Your management fee structure means Meridian's profit margin on that account is approximately 22%, or $847,000 per year. Subtract the potential refund and penalties, and you're looking at net profit of under $400,000 in year 1. Trevor blinked. That's a very conservative calculation." "It's a realistic calculation, and it assumes Hendricks doesn't terminate the contract early, which they can do with 90 days' notice if performance remains below guarantee." Evelyn opened a folder. "I've had similar analyses run on your other guaranteed return accounts. Mr. Blackstone, your major accounts are actually low-margin, high-risk relationships that expose Meridian to significant liability." The room was silent. Richard Chen spoke carefully. "Mrs. Park, I want to be clear that Trevor's account acquisition has been a net positive for Meridian. Even with the performance guarantees, we're generating revenue and growing the client base." "At what cost?" Evelyn looked around the table. "I've been a silent shareholder for 6 years. That was a mistake. While I've been silent, this firm's culture has shifted from sustainable growth to aggressive acquisition at any cost. You're writing contracts you can't honor, making promises that expose you to liability, and promoting the VPs who bring in the riskiest deals." One of the external directors spoke up. "What would you recommend, Mrs. Park?" "Several changes, effective immediately. First, no more guaranteed returns. Period. Any future client contract that includes performance guarantees must be approved by full board vote. Second, comprehensive review of all existing high-risk contracts, with plans to either renegotiate terms or wind down relationships that expose us to unacceptable liability. Third, new performance metrics for VPs. We evaluate on profit margins and risk-adjusted returns, not just gross revenue." Richard nodded slowly. "Those are reasonable reforms. We can implement them over the next quarter." "Not next quarter. Now. We vote on these policy changes today. Implement them this week." Evelyn looked directly at Trevor. "Mr. Blackstone, Your promotion to VP of Business Development is on hold pending full resolution of your current account's performance issues. If Hendrix exercises their guarantee provision, we'll need to discuss whether your approach aligns with Meridian's long-term strategy. Trevor's face flushed red. Mrs. Park, with respect, this seems like an overreaction. Every firm in this industry takes calculated risks. I've brought in more new accounts than any other VP in the past 2 years. You've brought in liability disguised as accounts, Evelyn interrupted. Mr. Chen, I'd like a vote on the policy changes. Board members, you have the proposals in front of you. All in favor. 8 hands went up. Richard Chen raised his hand last, clearly unhappy but unwilling to oppose the majority shareholder. Motion carries. Richard, I'll expect implementation plans by Friday. Evelyn gathered her papers. One more thing. I'm appointing Marcus Chen as an advisory consultant to the board on risk management and client portfolio strategy. He'll review all VP-level contracts going forward and provide independent assessment of risk exposure. Now everyone was looking at me. Trevor's expression had moved from confusion to anger to something approaching horror as he finally connected the dots. Mrs. Park, Richard said carefully, Marcus Chen is a wealth manager, not a Meridian employee. Also, his my personal wealth manager, yes. And is Sarah Blackstone's ex-husband, yes. Both facts are irrelevant. Marcus has 20 years of experience in portfolio management, a flawless track record, and no vested interest in protecting egos over profits. He'll provide quarterly risk assessments. His first assignment is a full audit of Trevor Blackstone's client contracts. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. As board members filed out, Trevor approached Richard Chen, speaking in urgent, hushed tones. Richard looked exhausted, shaking his head at whatever Trevor was saying. I waited near the door as Evelyn gathered her things. As we left together, Trevor called out, Marcus, can I talk to you for a minute? Evelyn squeezed my arm gently. I'll wait in the lobby. I turned to face Trevor. The conference room was empty now except for us. What the hell was that? Trevor's voice was tight, controlled. You're consulting for the board now. You're auditing my accounts. Mrs. Park requested my expertise. I accepted. This is because of the wedding, isn't it? Because I made a few jokes. Trevor, this has nothing to do with the wedding. It has to do with you creating $2.3 million in liability exposure for a company my client owns 51% of. You set this up. You knew about Evelyn Park's stake in Meridian and you. I've known about it for 6 years. It's never been relevant before because I don't mix my portfolio management work with personal matters. But when my largest client asks me to review holdings in a company where leadership is making poor decisions, I give her my honest assessment. Poor decisions. His voice rose. I've closed more accounts than anyone else in my division. You've closed accounts with guaranteed returns in a volatile market. That's not sales skill, Trevor. That's reckless promise-making. And it's about to cost you your promotion. I earned that promotion. Richard promised it to me. Richard doesn't control the board. Evelyn does. I kept my voice level. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to work very hard to get Hendrix Healthcare to target returns. You're going to renegotiate your other high-risk contracts. And you're going to hope that the board doesn't decide you're more liability than asset. Or what? Or Evelyn will recommend your termination and Richard will comply because he has no choice. She controls 51% of voting shares. Trevor stayed at me, processing. This is because I married Sarah. No, Trevor. This is because you spent an entire wedding reception making sure everyone knew you were more successful than me without bothering to learn anything about what I actually do. You assumed wealth management was boring and safe. You assumed I was irrelevant. You assumed wrong. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Trevor, my smallest client account is $18 million. My average is $27.6 million. That $12 million Hendrix deal you're so proud of? It's lunch money. I left him standing in the empty conference room. The next 2 weeks played out like a slow-motion car crash that Trevor Blackstone couldn't stop watching. First, word spread through Meridian that Evelyn Park had attended a board meeting for the first time in years and implemented sweeping policy changes. The company's VPs went into panic mode, reviewing all their contracts for potential guarantee clauses or risky terms. Second, I began my advisory consultant work, which meant reviewing every major client contract signed in the past 2 years. I discovered 3 more problematic deals beyond Trevor's, 1 by another VP, 2 by senior directors. All included some form of performance commitment that exposed Meridian to liability. My report to the board was detailed, professional, and damning. Total liability exposure, $4.1 million. Recommended actions: immediate renegotiation of all high-risk contracts or orderly wind-down of relationships. Richard Chen called me on a Friday afternoon, 2 weeks after the board meeting. "Marcus, can we speak confidentially?" Of course. Evelyn's reforms are necessary. I'm not disputing that. But they are also creating a culture of fear among my VPs. People are afraid to close accounts now, worried that any creative contract terms will be flagged as risky. Richard, there's a difference between creative contract terms and guaranteed returns in a volatile market. Your VP should be afraid of the latter. Trevor came to me yesterday and asked if he should start looking for other opportunities. He thinks you're targeting him specifically. I'm targeting problematic contracts. If Trevor wrote the most problematic contracts, that's correlation, not targeting. Richard sighed. For what it's worth, I think Trevor genuinely believed those guaranteed returns were achievable. He's aggressive, maybe overconfident, but is not malicious. Intent doesn't matter if the result is millions in liability. Agreed. But Marcus. Richard paused. You have to know how this looks. Your ex-wife marries Trevor. 3 weeks later, you're consulting for the board and auditing his accounts. People are talking. Let them talk. My work speaks for itself. If Trevor's contracts were solid, my audit would show that. They are not solid, so the audit reflects reality. What's your recommendation on Trevor specifically? Evelyn wants my assessment by Monday. This was the moment I'd been waiting for without realizing I'd been waiting for it. Honestly, Trevor has talent. He closes accounts, builds relationships, understands client needs. His fundamental problem is judgment. He prioritizes closing deals over long-term sustainability. That's correctable with proper oversight and incentive realignment. So you don't think he should be fired? I think he should be placed on performance review. No promotion to VP of Business Development. Continued employment contingent on successfully renegotiating his high-risk contracts or hitting guaranteed returns on all current accounts. If he can't do that, then yes, termination. But give him the chance to fix his mistakes. Richard was quiet. That's more generous than I expected. Richard, I don't want to destroy Trevor's career. I want Meridian to be a well-run firm that doesn't expose my client to unnecessary risk. If Trevor can adapt, he's valuable. If he can't, he's a liability. Simple as that. I'll include your recommendation in my report to Evelyn. Thank you, Marcus. After hanging up, I sat on my balcony watching the Hudson River. The sun was setting, painting the water orange and gold. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Heard through the grapevine that Trevor's on thin ice at Meridian. You had anything to do with that? I typed back, just doing my job. Some ice is thinner than others. The following Monday, Richard Chen presented his recommendations to the board. I wasn't present. This was an executive session, but Evelyn called me afterward. Trevor Blackstone keeps his job on probation. No promotion. 6-month performance review. Required to renegotiate his guaranteed return contracts or meet performance targets on all accounts. If he fails either requirement, termination. That's fair, I said. Richard also recommended we make your consulting position permanent. Quarterly risk assessments, annual contract audits, direct reporting to me and the board. Are you interested? What's the time commitment? 20 hours per quarter, plus availability for board meetings as needed. We'd pay $150,000 annually. I calculated quickly. 20 hours per quarter was manageable alongside my current client load. And $150,000 for what amounted to doing diligence work I'd do anyway as Evelyn's wealth manager. I'll accept on one condition. If my consulting work ever creates a conflict with my wealth management practice, the consulting ends. My primary obligation is to my clients, including you. Agreed. I'll have Margaret draw up the contract. That evening, Sarah called. First time she'd contacted me since the wedding. Marcus, we need to talk about what you're doing. Hello, Sarah. How was the honeymoon? Don't. You know what this is about. Trevor says you're auditing his accounts, that you're trying to get him fired. I'm auditing Meridian contracts because Evelyn Park asked me to. Trevor's accounts came up because they represent significant liability. You could have disclosed your conflict of interest. You could have recused yourself. What conflict? I'm Evelyn's wealth manager. She's Meridian's majority shareholder. When she asked for my professional opinion about her holdings, I provided. Your marriage to Trevor doesn't change my fiduciary duty to my client. This is revenge, Marcus. Admit it. Trevor made a few stupid jokes at the wedding and now you're destroying his career. Sarah, I've read Trevor's contracts. He guaranteed 8% returns to Hendrix Healthcare in a market that's barely making 5%. That's not a joke. That's a $450,000 liability. If I'm destroying his career, he did the destroying. I'm just documenting the damage. You recommended he be fired. I recommended probation with clear performance requirements. If Trevor meets those requirements, he keeps his job. That's more generous than most firms would be. Because you want him to fail. You want to watch him struggle. I took a deep breath. Sarah, do you know how much Trevor's $12 million Hendrix account is worth to Meridian after fee refunds and risk-adjusted profit margins? What? Less than $400,000 in year one. My smallest client account generates more annual revenue than Trevor's biggest deal. I don't need to watch Trevor fail. He's failing at a level so far below mine that it's not even satisfying. Silence on the line. The truth is, I continued, Trevor spent your wedding reception telling everyone he was more successful than me because he makes real deals while I play it safe with inherited wealth. He convinced himself that wealth management is beneath him. But Sarah, I manage $470 million in assets. Trevor closed one $12 million account and thinks is a rainmaker. Do you see the disconnect? You're still angry that I called you boring, that I said you'd never understand my world. I was hurt by that. Yes. But Sarah, I'm not doing this to get back at you. Evelyn Park is my largest client. She owns 51% of Meridian. When she asked me to assess risk in her holdings, I found significant problems. What was I supposed to do? Ignore them because my ex-wife married one of the people creating those problems. You could have been discreet. You could have handled this without humiliating Trevor in front of the entire board. Evelyn called the board meeting, not me. I would have been fine providing a private report. She chose to make it public because she wanted institutional change, not just individual accountability. Sarah was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, tired. Trevor's devastated. He thought he was on track for VP. Now he's on probation and the whole company knows it. Then Trevor should focus on fixing his contracts and proving he deserves to keep his job. If he does that, this becomes a learning experience. If he can't, I let the sentence hang. I shouldn't have said you were boring, Marcus, or that I was upgrading. That was cruel. Yes, it was. But this feels cruel too. You have all the power here. Evelyn listens to you. The board trusts you. And Trevor's career is in your hands. That's not justice. That's revenge with extra steps. Sarah, I recommended Trevor keep his job. I could have recommended immediate termination. Do you understand the distinction? She hung up without responding. 6 months passed. Trevor Blackstone worked harder than he'd ever worked in his life, trying to meet the probation requirements. He partially succeeded. 2 of his guaranteed return accounts were renegotiated to standard fee structures. The clients weren't happy, but they agreed when Trevor explained that guaranteed returns weren't sustainable long-term. But Hendrix Healthcare refused to renegotiate. They'd signed a contract with specific terms, and they expected Meridian to honor it. When year-end numbers came in, Hendrix was at 6.1% returns, well below the 8% guarantee. The fee refund was $387,000. Hendrix also exercised their early termination clause and moved their business to a competing firm. Trevor's probation review happened in March, 11 months after his wedding. I attended the board meeting as Evelyn's consultant. Richard Chen presented Trevor's performance summary. Mr. Blackstone successfully renegotiated two high-risk contracts and reduced Meridian's overall liability exposure by approximately $1.2 million. However, the Hendricks Healthco situation resulted in significant financial loss and client relationship damage. My recommendation is continued probation for an additional 6 months. Evelyn looked at me. Marcus, your assessment. Trevor demonstrated he can learn and adapt. The contract renegotiations were professionally handled, but the Hendricks situation reveals an ongoing judgment problem. Trevor prioritized closing a splashy deal over ensuring the firm could deliver on promises. That's a fundamental issue. Trevor, sitting at the end of the table again, spoke up. With respect, the Hendricks deal was approved by leadership. I didn't go rogue. Richard signed off on that contract. That's true, I acknowledged. Which is why Richard and the board share responsibility for the outcome. But Trevor, you pitched that deal. You convinced Hendricks that 8% returns were achievable. You convinced Richard that guaranteeing those returns was worth the risk. You were wrong on both counts. The market underperformed. That's not my fault. No. But promising specific returns in an unpredictable market was your choice. You valued closing the deal over protecting the firm from downside risk. One of the board members, a woman named Patricia Vance, spoke up. Mr. Blackstone, what would you do differently if you could go back? Trevor thought carefully. I'd still pursue the Hendricks account. They were a valuable potential client. But I'd structure the contract differently. Maybe a tiered fee system based on performance ranges rather than a guaranteed minimum. Or I'd propose a longer evaluation period before implementing guarantees. Patricia nodded. So you learned something? Yes. Then my recommendation is we end probation with a formal warning. Mr. Blackstone has demonstrated accountability and adaptation. Let's give him the opportunity to prove he's internalized these lessons. The board voted. 6 in favor of ending probation. 2 abstentions. Trevor Blackstone kept his job with a formal reprimand in his file. After the meeting, Trevor approached me in the hallway. Thank you for not recommending termination. I recommended what the evidence supported. You did the work to save your job. Sarah says you told her you could have buried me if you wanted to. That's not what I said. I told her I recommended probation when termination was an option. Those are different things. Trevor nodded slowly. For what it's worth, I was an asshole at my wedding. The comments about playing it safe, about making real money, that was insecure bullshit. Sarah had talked about you a lot during our relationship, and I think I felt threatened. Why threatened? You won. You married her. I won a divorced woman who spent our entire engagement comparing me to her ex-husband. Even the compliments were comparisons. Trevor's more ambitious than you were. Trevor actually cares about my career. Trevor makes me feel valued. Everything was framed in terms of how I was better than you. I hadn't expected this level of honesty. That must have been frustrating. It was. So at the wedding, when I finally met you, I wanted to make it clear, to you, to Sarah, to everyone, that I was the upgrade. That you were the past, and I was the future. But man, I had no idea who I was talking to. Most people don't know the details of anyone's financial life, Trevor. It's not something we advertise. Yeah, but I was so confident in my own success that I didn't bother to learn anything about yours. Classic mistake. Underestimating someone because they don't perform their value loudly. We stood in awkward silence for a moment. So what happens now? Trevor asked. You're still consulting for the board. I'm still a VP at Meridian. Sarah's still my wife and your ex. This dynamic isn't going away. Now you do your job well, write sustainable contracts, and we probably never interact again. I review quarterly reports, but I'm not micromanaging VPs. If you stay clean, you stay off my radar. And if Sarah and I don't work out, if she realizes she married someone to prove a point about moving on from you, then you deal with that marriage issue, and it has nothing to do with me or Meridian. Trevor, I don't care about your relationship with Sarah. I care that Evelyn Park's $70 million investment in Meridian is protected. That's the beginning and end of my interest in your life. Trevor laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. The irony is, Sarah doesn't believe that. She thinks you orchestrated this whole thing to punish us for getting married. She can't accept that you genuinely don't care. Then that's between you and Sarah. I can't control what she believes. I walked away, leaving Trevor in the hallway of his own company, looking smaller than he had at his wedding 11 months earlier. 2 years after Trevor's wedding, I sat in my Tribeca apartment reviewing portfolio reports. Evelyn Park's holdings had grown to $78 million. Meridian Financial Group had rebounded from its guaranteed return crisis and posted solid returns for 8 consecutive quarters. Trevor Blackstone was still a VP at Meridian, no longer on probation, doing competent if unspectacular work. He'd stopped writing risky contracts and focused on sustainable client relationships. Richard Chin told me Trevor would probably never make VP of Business Development. The Hendricks situation had permanently stalled his upward trajectory, but he was valuable enough to keep. Sarah and Trevor were still married, though I'd heard through mutual acquaintances that the relationship had been strained. Apparently, Sarah had struggled with the fact that her new husband's career had been managed by her ex-husband. Trevor's resentment about the probation and his derailed promotion had created tension. I didn't follow their lives closely. Occasionally, I'd see a social media post or hear something through the network, but mostly they'd faded into the background of my life. I was dating someone new, Catherine, a professor of economics at NYU. She was brilliant, funny, and had no connection to my previous marriage or the financial industry. We'd been together 8 months, and it felt healthy, balanced, free of the comparison dynamics that had poisoned my marriage to Sarah. My practice had grown. I now managed $520 million across 19 clients, with a waiting list for new accounts. The Meridian consulting work had raised my profile in certain circles. Word had spread that I'd identified and helped resolve a significant risk management problem. Other firms had approached me about similar consulting arrangements. I declined most of them. The Meridian work continued because of Evelyn, but I had no desire to become a professional corporate consultant. I was a wealth manager. That's what I was good at, what I enjoyed, what I wanted to build. On a Tuesday afternoon in May, my phone rang with an unknown number. Marcus Chen. Hi, Marcus. This is David Reeve from Hamilton & Associates. We're a headhunting firm specializing in executive placements in financial services. Do you have a moment? I'm not looking for new opportunities, David. I understand, but I'm calling about something different. We have a client, a major wealth management firm, looking for someone to head their risk management and compliance division. It's a C-suite position, base salary $800,000 plus significant bonus potential. When we described the ideal candidate profile, your name came up repeatedly. I'm a wealth manager, not a compliance officer. That's exactly why you're perfect for this. The firm wants someone who understands client relationships and portfolio strategy, not just regulatory frameworks. Your work with Meridian Financial Group demonstrated exactly that combination: technical risk assessment with practical client management. I appreciate the call, but I'm not interested. I have clients depending on me and a practice I've built over 20 years. I'm not walking away from that for a corporate role. The compensation would be substantially higher than your current income. I'd estimate total comp in the $2 to $3 million range for the right candidate. David, I made $4.1 million last year from my practice. Money isn't the issue. Interest is. I don't want to be a corporate executive. May I ask why? You clearly have the skills and experience. I thought about how to explain it. Because I like what I do. I like working directly with clients, understanding their goals, building personalized strategies. Corporate compliance is about rules and processes. That's necessary work, but it's not my work. Fair enough. Would you be willing to provide referrals? We're looking for someone with your background, maybe a colleague who might be interested. I can think about it and send some names if anyone comes to mind. After hanging up, I sat looking at my client list. 19 families, $520 million in assets, each relationship built over years of trust and consistent performance. Multiple firms had tried to recruit me over the past 2 decades. The answer was always no. This was my life's work. Not glamorous by corporate standards. No executive title. No corner office. No company perks. Just me, my clients, and a track record of protecting and growing their wealth. Sarah had called it boring. Trevor had called it playing it safe. But when Evelyn Park needed help protecting her $70 million investment in Meridian, she didn't call a VP of Business Development or CEO. She called me. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Dinner tonight? I'm making that pasta you liked." I smiled and typed back, "I'll bring wine." "What time?" 7:30. "Also, I have news about my research grant." "Good news. Can't wait to hear." This was happiness. Not Instagram-worthy, not status signaling, just genuine contentment with work I found meaningful and a relationship with someone I enjoyed. At 6:45 p.m., my doorbell rang unexpectedly. I checked the camera. Sarah stood in the hallway. I opened the door. "Sarah, this is unexpected." "I know. I'm sorry for dropping by unannounced. Can I come in for a minute?" I stepped aside. She entered, looking around the apartment. She'd never been here before. I'd bought it after the divorce. Nice place. Very you, minimalist, organized. Those ridiculous floor-to-ceiling windows. "What brings you here, Sarah?" She sat on the couch, looking tired. "Trevor and I are separating. Probably divorcing." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you, though? Really?" "Yes, actually. I don't wish you unhappiness, Sarah. We didn't work out, but that doesn't mean I want you to suffer. Trevor thinks you destroyed us. That the probation, the board meetings, the whole Meridian situation created too much resentment in our marriage to recover from. And what do you think?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I think I married Trevor because I was angry at you. Angry that you were content with your quiet, stable career while I wanted more. More status, more visibility, more proof that I was successful. Trevor represented that. He was flashy, ambitious, always talking about his latest deal." "Sarah, let me finish. I need to say this." She took a deep breath. "At the wedding, when Trevor was making those comments about you being safe and boring, part of me enjoyed it. I wanted you to feel small, to feel like I'd upgraded. But then the whole Meridian thing happened, and I realized I'd never actually understood what you do. I thought wealth management was just, I don't know, balancing portfolios and collecting fees. I had no idea about the scale, the strategy, the expertise. Most people don't. It's not flashy work. That's the thing, though. Trevor's work was flashy but shallow. He closed deals by promising things he couldn't deliver. Your work was quiet but substantial. You managed hundreds of millions of dollars, and your clients trusted you completely because you never promised what you couldn't deliver. Sarah, why are you telling me this? Because I owe you an apology. A real one. I spent our last year of marriage telling you that you lacked ambition, that you were content with mediocrity, that you'd never understand my world. But Marcus, you understood everything. You just didn't need to perform your success loudly." I sat down across from her. "I appreciate the apology. For what it's worth, our marriage ended for real reasons. We wanted different things, valued different measures of success. That's legitimate. We didn't fit. Did you ever love me? Really love me, not just go through the motions?" "Of course I loved you. I married you, built a life with you, tried to make it work even when it was clear we were growing apart. The love was real, Sarah. It just wasn't enough to overcome our fundamental incompatibility. Do you hate me now?" "No, I'm indifferent, which is probably worse from your perspective. I don't think about you much, Sarah. When the Meridian situation happened, I wasn't thinking this will show Sarah or this will hurt Trevor. I was thinking Evelyn Park's investment needs protection. Your marriage to Trevor was irrelevant to that calculation." She laughed, but it sounded sad. "Indifference. Yeah, that's worse than hate. I'm sorry. Don't be. You're right. You moved on completely while I was still performing my upgrade for an audience that didn't care." Trevor said something a few months ago that stuck with me. He said, "Sarah, your ex-husband doesn't think about you at all, and I'm exhausted from competing with someone who isn't even in the race." That was perceptive of him. It was also the beginning of the end. How do you stay married to someone when you realize you chose them to prove a point to someone who doesn't care? I didn't have an answer for that. Sarah stood up. "I should go. I just wanted to apologize and to tell you that I understand now why you are the way you are. You don't need external validation because you have internal certainty. I spent my whole career chasing titles and promotions and recognition, and you just built something real without needing applause. Different personality types. Sarah. Neither is wrong. Maybe, but I think I chose wrong when I chose someone like me instead of someone different. Trevor and I are too similar. Both always performing, always competing, always needing to be the winner. There's no balance. She walked to the door, then paused. Are you happy, Marcus? Really happy? Yes. I have work I find meaningful, clients I respect, and I'm dating someone I genuinely like. It's a good life. I'm glad. You deserve it. She opened the door. Take care, Marcus. You too, Sarah. I watched her leave, then texted Catherine. Unexpected situation came up. Running 15 minutes late. Start without me if you're hungry. Everything okay? Yay. Just some old business getting resolved. See you soon. 3 months after Sarah's visit, I was invited to speak at a wealth management conference in Chicago. The topic, Risk Assessment Beyond Numbers, when client relationships meet corporate governance. I almost declined. Public speaking wasn't my strength, and I had no desire to become known for the Meridian situation. But the conference organizer was persistent, and eventually I agreed to a 45-minute session. The room held about 150 people, mostly wealth managers, some corporate compliance officers, a handful of financial journalists. My name is Marcus Chen, and 3 years ago my largest client asked me to assess her holdings in a financial services firm. That assessment led to comprehensive policy reforms, executive accountability measures, and significant changes in how the firm approached client contracts. But the story of how it happened reveals lessons that go beyond risk management. I clicked to the first slide, a graph showing Meridian's liability exposure before and after the reforms. Lesson 1. Quiet competence beats loud performance. The VP whose contract created this liability was talented, charismatic, and very good at closing deals. He was also reckless, promising outcomes he couldn't guarantee to close sales. In corporate environments, we often reward the loudest voices and the biggest deal closers. But long-term success requires sustainable practices, not just flashy wins. Next slide. Lesson 2. Personal dynamics and professional obligations are separate spheres. The VP in question was married to my ex-wife. That fact was emotionally complicated but professionally irrelevant. When my client asked for risk assessment, I provided it based on evidence, not feelings. If you can't separate personal history from professional judgment, you're in the wrong profession. I saw several people nodding. Lesson 3. Trust is built on consistency, not promises. My client trusted me to manage $70 million because over 9 years, I'd consistently delivered solid performance without promising miracles. The VP whose contracts I audited built relationships by promising exceptional returns. When he couldn't deliver, trust evaporated. In wealth management, underpromise and overdeliver beats the reverse every time. Lesson 4. Documentation protects everyone. The only reason we could comprehensively reform Meridian's practices was because everything was documented. Contracts, performance guarantees, board approvals. When problems emerged, we had clear evidence of what was promised, who approved it, and what went wrong. Document your decisions, especially the risky ones. I paused, looking around the room. Lesson 5. And this is the big one. Power isn't always visible. That VP spent an evening at his wedding making sure everyone knew he was more successful than me. He had the title, the public recognition, the high-profile deals. What he didn't know was that I managed the portfolio of the person who controlled his company. Real power is often quiet, held by people who don't need to advertise it. A hand went up. One of the journalists. Mr. Chen, there were rumors that your involvement in the Meridian situation was motivated by revenge. That your ex-wife married this VP and you used your position to damage his career. How do you respond? I respond by pointing to outcomes. If I'd wanted revenge, I would have recommended immediate termination. Instead, I recommended probation with performance requirements. The VP kept his job, learned from his mistakes, and is still employed at Meridian today. That's not revenge, That's accountability paired with opportunity for redemption. But you must have felt some satisfaction when he was placed on probation. I felt satisfaction that my client's investment was better protected. The VP's career difficulties were a consequence of his own choices, not my vindictiveness. If he'd written sustainable contracts, my audit would have been routine and positive. Another question from a compliance officer: what would you have done if the VP had been a complete stranger? If there was no personal history? Exactly the same thing. My recommendations were based on contract analysis and liability assessment, not personal feelings. The personal history made it emotionally complicated, but it didn't change the professional calculus. After the session, dozens of people approached with questions, business cards, and their own stories of navigating personal dynamics in professional contexts. One woman, probably in her 50s, waited until the crowd cleared. "Mr. Chen, that was illuminating. I'm Janet Reeves, no relation to anyone in your story, despite the name. I'm a managing partner at Stinson Wealth Advisors. We're a small firm, 12 partners, about $800 million under management." "Nice to meet you, Janet. I have a situation that's somewhat similar to yours. One of our partners is brilliant at client acquisition, but makes promises we can't always keep. Is also the founder's son, which makes accountability complicated. I've been trying to figure out how to address it without creating family drama." "Document everything," I said immediately. "Every promise he makes, every contract he signs, every client commitment. Then present the data to your founder, not as an attack on his son, but as a risk assessment for the firm. Make it about protecting what he built, not punishing his kid. And if the founder refuses to act, then you have a decision to make about whether you want to be part of a firm that prioritizes family comfort over client protection. I can't tell you what the right choice is. That depends on your values and risk tolerance." Janet nodded slowly. "You make it sound simple. It's not simple. It's clear. There's a difference. The choice is hard, but the principle is straightforward. Client protection comes first. Everything else is secondary." That evening, I had dinner with David, my friend who'd been texting updates throughout the Meridian situation. "You're getting a reputation," David said, grinning. "The wealth manager who took down his ex-wife's husband. That's not what happened, and you know it." "I know, but that's the story people tell. It's more interesting than wealth manager does thorough risk assessment and recommends policy changes. People are exhausting. Yes, but they are also your potential clients. Some of those people at your session today are going to remember you when they need a wealth manager." The Meridian situation, regardless of the personal complications, demonstrated your judgment and integrity. That's valuable. I don't want to build a practice based on drama. You won't. You will build it based on competence that was demonstrated in a high-stakes situation. There's a difference. My phone buzzed. A text from Catherine. "How was the speech? Did you make everyone cry with your boring financial competence?" I laughed and showed David the message. "She's perfect for you," he said. "Yes, she is. Because she doesn't care about status or wealth or public recognition. Because she values substance over performance. And because she thinks financial competence is boring, which means she's not trying to compete in my professional sphere." Unlike Sarah, I agreed. 18 months later, my practice had grown to $650 million under management across 22 clients. The Meridian consulting work had continued, though it was largely routine: quarterly reviews, annual audits, occasional board presentations. Trevor Blackstone had left Meridian 6 months ago, taking a position at a smaller firm where he could start fresh without the cloud of probation hanging over him. According to Richard Chen, Trevor had actually thanked him for the second chance and admitted that the probation had taught him necessary lessons about sustainable business practices. Sarah had moved to Boston for a new executive role at a tech company. We hadn't spoken since her visit to my apartment. I'd heard through mutual friends that she was doing well, focusing on her career, not dating seriously. My life had settled into comfortable routine: client meetings, portfolio reviews, quarterly trips to visit out-of-state clients, regular dinners with Catherine, who'd moved in 6 months ago. Then on a Wednesday afternoon in November, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Marcus Chen." Hi, Marcus. This is Trevor Blackstone. I sat up straighter, surprised. Trevor, this is unexpected. I know. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Just reviewing reports. What can I do for you? I wanted to thank you. I know that sounds weird given our history, but I mean it. Thank you for what? For not burying me when you could have. For recommending probation instead of termination. For giving me the chance to learn from my mistakes instead of just punishing me for them. I was quiet for a moment. Trevor, I made the recommendation I thought was appropriate based on the evidence. You did the work to save your job. I did, but you created the opportunity for that work to matter. If you'd recommended termination, Richard would have complied. I'd have been fired with a black mark that would have followed me for years. How's the new position? Good. Really good, actually. Smaller firm, less pressure to close huge deals, more focus on sustainable relationships. I'm making less money but sleeping better. He laughed. Turns out there's value in playing it safe sometimes. There's value in playing smart, Trevor. Safe and smart aren't the same thing. True. Listen, I called because I wanted to say something I should have said years ago. At my wedding, I was an insecure asshole who felt threatened by a guy I'd never met. I made those comments about making real money and taking real risks because I was trying to convince myself that marrying Sarah meant I'd won some competition. Trevor, please let me finish. What I didn't understand was that you weren't competing. You'd built something real, a practice, a reputation, client relationships based on trust. I'd built a career on flash and promises I couldn't keep. When the Meridian situation happened, it forced me to see that distinction. I hated you for it at first, but now I'm grateful. I appreciate you saying that. I also wanted to apologize to you on Sarah's behalf. She can't really do it herself. Too much pride, too much residual anger. But she told me once that she realized she'd underestimated you for the entire marriage. That she'd been so focused on climbing her corporate ladder that she dismissed your work as boring because it wasn't visible enough. Sarah and I were incompatible for real reasons. Trevor, the underestimation was part of it, but not the whole story. Maybe, but I think she loved the idea of you more than the reality. The quiet competence, the stability, the unshakable integrity. Those sound great on paper. But living with someone who's that self-contained, who doesn't need external validation, who's perfectly content in their chosen path, that's harder than it sounds for someone like Sarah who needs constant achievement. Is that why your marriage didn't work? Partly. We were too similar, both performing for an invisible audience, both needing to be the winner in every situation. There was no balance. You and Sarah didn't work because you were too different. Sarah and I didn't work because we were too alike. Have you talked to her recently? Not in about 6 months. Last I heard, she's killing it in Boston. VP of operations at some tech startup, working 100-hour weeks, living the dream. Trevor paused. Or living what she thinks is the dream. I'm not sure she knows the difference anymore. After hanging up, I sat looking at my client list on the computer screen. 22 families, $615 million. Each relationship built on trust accumulated over years of consistent performance. This was success, not the kind that got profiled in business magazines or generated headlines. Just quiet, sustainable, meaningful work that protected and grew the wealth of people who trusted me. Sarah had called it boring. Trevor had called it playing it safe. The truth was simpler. It was just different from what they valued. That evening, Catherine and I made dinner together, a routine we'd fallen into, her chopping vegetables while I handled the cooking, both of us talking about our days. Anything interesting happen? She asked. Got a call from Trevor Blackstone, my ex-wife's ex-husband. The guy from the Meridian situation. Yeah, he called to thank me for not destroying his career when I had the chance. Catherine laughed. Did you tell him you weren't trying to destroy anything, just doing your job? I did. He seems to understand now. Took him 3 years, but he got there. Do you feel vindicated? Satisfied that he finally sees you were right? I thought about it. Not really. Vindication implies I was waiting for his approval or validation. I wasn't. Trevor's opinion of me never mattered. Not at his wedding, not during the Meridian situation, not now. That's very zen of you. It's very practical of me. I can't control what people think about my work or my choices. I can only control the quality of what I do and the integrity with which I do it. Trevor's approval is as irrelevant as his earlier contempt. Catherine kissed my cheek. This is why I love you. You're insufferably consistent. Insufferably. It's a compliment. Most people waver, second-guess themselves, need constant reassurance they're on the right path. You just stay the course. It's simultaneously admirable and slightly annoying. I'll take it. 5 years after the wedding that started everything, I gave one final speech about the Meridian situation. It was at a Columbia Business School alumni event. Sarah and I had both graduated from Columbia, though she wasn't in attendance. The organizers wanted me to talk about navigating complex professional relationships in the financial services industry. What they really wanted was the juicy story of how I'd taken down my ex-wife's husband. I gave them something different. Success in wealth management isn't about the biggest accounts or the flashiest returns, I began. It's about trust compounded over time. My largest client has been with me for 12 years. She's never called to ask why a particular investment underperformed, never questioned my strategy, never threatened to move her money elsewhere. You know why? Because over 12 years, I've consistently done what I said I would do. No more, no less. I clicked to a slide showing Meridian's performance over the 5 years since the reforms. When I assessed risk at Meridian Financial Group, it wasn't because I was angry or vengeful or trying to prove something. It was because my client asked for my professional opinion and I gave it. The personal complications, my ex-wife, her new husband, his career, those were noise. The signal was clear. The firm had structural problems that needed fixing. Here's what I learned from that experience. Your reputation is built in quiet moments when nobody's watching. Those contracts Trevor Blackstone signed, he thought nobody would notice the risky terms because they were buried in legal language. But someone always notices eventually. Your boss, your client, your audit, the market. Someone sees what you actually did versus what you claim to do. The other lesson is this. Comparison is poison. Sarah compared me to her corporate colleagues and found me lacking. Trevor compared himself to me at his wedding and felt superior. Both comparisons were pointless. We were doing different work, pursuing different goals, measuring success differently. The comparison only mattered because we let it matter. What I should have told Sarah during our marriage, what I finally understand now, is that compatibility isn't about one person being better than the other. It's about finding someone whose values align with yours, whose definition of success feels right to you, whose way of moving through the world makes sense to you. Sarah and I were incompatible not because one of us was wrong, but because we valued fundamentally different things. A hand went up, a young woman, probably in her 20s. Mr. Chen, do you ever regret the Meridian situation? Even though you were technically right, it seems like it caused a lot of pain for multiple people. I don't regret it, but I'm thoughtful about it. Trevor's career was damaged. Sarah's marriage ended. Richard Chen had to implement reforms that made his job harder. Those are real consequences for real people. But the alternative was allowing systematic risk to continue unchecked, which could have hurt clients who'd done nothing wrong. Sometimes the right choice creates pain. That doesn't make it the wrong choice. What would you have done differently? Honestly, nothing. I'd have made the same recommendations based on the same evidence. But I might have tried harder to help Trevor understand that probation was an opportunity, not a punishment. I might have reached out to Sarah earlier to explain my thinking instead of letting her believe it was personal. Small kindnesses around the edges of hard decisions. That's what I'd change. After the event, I walked through Columbia's campus. It was full, leaves turning orange and red, students rushing between classes like Sarah and I once did. My phone buzzed. Catherine, sending a photo of our dog doing something ridiculous. I smiled and sent back a heart emoji. This was my life now. Not dramatic, not headline-worthy, just good. Meaningful work, trusted relationships, contentment instead of constant striving. Sarah had asked me once if I was happy. The answer was yes. Not happy in the explosive, social media-worthy way. Happy in the quiet, sustainable way that comes from building something solid and living with integrity. The $70 million account I'd almost closed to protect Evelyn Park's portfolio was now worth $89 million. Over 12 years of working together, I'd grown her assets by 78% while protecting them from major downside risk. That number represented not just financial returns but decades of accumulated trust. Trevor's $12 million deal, the one he'd been so proud of, had generated maybe $2.5 million in total profit for Meridian after all the guarantee refunds and penalties. My management of Evelyn's account generated approximately $700,000 annually in fees, plus the incalculable value of her majority shareholder stability. The comparison was stark, but only to people who understood what they were comparing. Trevor had built a career on flash and volume. I'd built one on substance and trust. Neither approach was inherently wrong. They just served different purposes and different values. But when crisis came, when real accountability arrived, substance outlasted flash every time. Epilogue, the email. 3 months ago, I received an email from Sarah. Subject line, closure, finally. Marcus, I'm writing because my therapist says I need to actually process what happened between us instead of just moving forward without reflection. So here's my reflection, for whatever it's worth. I underestimated you. Badly. I spent 11 years married to you without understanding what you actually did or why it mattered. I was so focused on my own career trajectory that I dismissed yours as safe and boring. I'm sorry for that. But I'm also angry. Angry that you let me underestimate you. You never corrected me, never explained the scale of what you managed, never pushed back when I called your work unchallenging. You just let me believe I was the ambitious one while you quietly managed $500 million. My therapist says that anger is misplaced, that it was my responsibility to understand my husband's work, not your responsibility to perform it differently. She's probably right, but it's still how I feel. Trevor says you saved his career by recommending probation instead of termination. He's grateful. I'm still processing. On one hand, you showed mercy when you could have destroyed him. On the other hand, you had the power to destroy him at all, and that power came from a place I never knew existed. I don't know if this email has a point. Maybe I just needed to say that I see you now. I see what you built, what you protected, what you valued. I see that the boring stability I dismissed was actually remarkable competence I didn't understand. I don't love you anymore. I'm not asking to reconcile or even be friends. I just wanted you to know that I finally get it. You weren't safe. You were solid. There's a difference. Be well. Sarah. I read the email 3 times, then called Catherine into my office. Read this and tell me if I should respond. She read it, then looked at me thoughtfully. Do you want to respond? I don't know. Part of me thinks closure requires response. Part of me thinks the whole point of moving on is not relitigating the past. What would you say if you responded? I thought about it. Probably that I accept her apology, I understand her anger, and I hope she finds what she's looking for in Boston. Something gracious and brief. Then say that. I typed a response. Sarah, thank you for the email. I accept your apology and understand the anger. I probably would have felt similarly in your position. You're right that I didn't correct your misconceptions about my work. That was partly because explaining it felt like boasting, partly because I was comfortable with who I was regardless of whether you understood it. In retrospect, better communication might have helped our marriage. Then again, the communication problems were symptomatic of deeper incompatibility. I'm glad Trevor's doing well. I'm glad you're thriving in Boston. I hope you find whatever form of success feels meaningful to you. Be well. Marcus. I sent it and closed my laptop. Feel better? Catherine asked. I feel complete. Like a chapter actually closed instead of just fading out. Good. Now come help me fix the disaster our dog made of the living room. We spent the evening cleaning up torn cushions and scattered toys, laughing at our absurd rescue dog's energy, planning a weekend trip upstate. This was happiness, not the kind that looked impressive from outside, not the kind that generated Instagram envy or business school case studies. Just quiet, solid contentment built on work that mattered and relationships that felt real. Sarah had wanted the upgrade. Trevor had wanted to prove he was the winner. Both had measured success by external metrics, titles, salaries, public recognition. I'd measured it by internal metrics. Am I doing work I respect? Am I treating people with integrity? Am I building something sustainable? 5 years after the wedding that started everything, I had my answer. Yes to all three. The $70 million account I'd protected, Evelyn Park's trust in me, represented more than numbers on a spreadsheet. It represented a promise kept over 12 years, a relationship on it, a responsibility taken seriously. Trevor had closed his $12 million deal to prove something. I managed Evelyn's $89 million because she trusted me to do it well. That difference between performance and competence, between flash and substance, between proving something and just being something, that was everything. Sarah finally understood it. Trevor had learned it the hard way. And me? I'd known it all along, which is why I'd never needed to close any account at all. The power wasn't in the closing. It was in the holding. The end. A final message to everyone watching. If you're reading this and thinking about the people who've underestimated you, the bosses who dismissed your work, the partners who didn't value your contributions, the people who measured your worth by superficial metrics, remember this. Your value doesn't depend on their understanding. Your success doesn't require their validation. And when the moment comes, when crisis or assessment or simple truth reveals what you actually built, let the work speak for itself. I didn't close the $70 million account to punish anyone. I kept it open, managed it well, and used it to protect both my client and an entire firm from catastrophic risk. That's not revenge. That's just competence doing what competence does. The people who underestimate you aren't your enemy. They are just uninformed. And eventually, if you build something real enough and solid enough, the truth becomes impossible to ignore. Stay quiet. Stay solid. Stay certain of your own worth. The rest takes care of itself.